dedicated to the truth seekers. Question everything.
Vegetable life and furnishes substance for multitudes of the living creatures that inhabit. But in the south where the region is the circumference so not sensual as in the north that sunlight cannot linger but we quickly over the greater southern circle completely at the same time as the shortest circle of the north, and so has no time to excite the surface, has no time to aid and attenuate animal and vegetable life to the same extent as in the north, consequently, and comparatively low south latitudes everything adheres to an aspect of desolation. The meridian lines diverged southwards in a degrees of longitude increase in accordingly, but the earth were global, the degrees of longitude northward and southward from the equator would diminish. distance between two places in the south on or about the same latitude and the difference of solar time or difference in longitude, we can calculate the length of a degree that allowed. 2. The circular planet of the Earth and ocean and immense sundial witnessing to its own level and an immobility. The position of the sun, the firmament in relation to it, is diurnal course indicates the time of day. The meridians are straight lines from the north center and diverge more and more southwards are 24 in number, corresponding with 24 hours of the day. The terrestrial surface is a dial plate. The time of day advances according to the progress of the sun in the firmament. The sun moves from east to west and comes around the same point in 24 hours. That's completing a circular path over the stationary plane Earth. The position of the sun in the firmament in relation to his monthly courses indicates the season. The sun revolutions from solstice to solstices are eccentric or spiral. It is summer during his 90th eccentric revolutions. From June to September it is autumn during his 90 revolution from September to the winter solstice, winter during those times from the winter solstice to the March equinox, and spring during his 90 spiral revolution from March to the summer solstice. The sun speed per hour on the equator from east to west is 1,035 miles per hour. His speed north or south in 90 days is 1,035 miles, and the distance embraces 15 degrees latitude. When the sun is moving from the tropical Cancer towards the equator, it is summer in the north and the days are 14 and 15 hours long. It is in winter in the south, or the days are 11 and 12 hours long. When the sun is moving from the Tropic of Capricorn northward towards the equator, it is summer in the south and the days are 13 and 12 hours long. The north is 16 point, the center, the south is a vast circumference, a circular boundary to all parts of this boundary, the circular south point. There is therefore no south point or pole, but infinitely forming a vast circumference. The meridians are straight lines north and south, and latitudes its distance along the meridian line. The degree of latitudes are 57 and a half, not 90 as upon the global or whatever. Meridians are semicircles 37 and 1/2 as a proportion of radius to circular conference, and a degree of latitudes is a definite unvarying quantity as measured throughout upon a total meridian length. It is 69 and 1/4 miles upon a plane surface, and this agreed most exact measurements over made on the face of this is a phenomenal greatest skill and characteristic of north, thus being the central regions of latitude are you see the diameter with the northern center. A degree of latitude is a definite and varying quantity as measured throughout upon the total meridian length, but a degree of longitude is a varying quantity according to the radial distance on the equator of the degree allowed to equal a degree of longitude north of the equivalent to exceeds longitude south of that. Longitude exceeds latitude. The difference between the distance between these parallels from each other and the equator is precisely the same as between any two meridians on the equatorial circle. This distance on the equator is 1,035 mi, 124th part of 25,000 miles of parallels of value sections of 15 degrees or 1,035 miles each. The sun's speed per hour on the equator is 1,035 miles in distance northward from the equator to summer solstice, which the sun makes 90 days or 90 centric spiral revolutions, is also the 1,035 mi. This is the sun's northward journey, and it decreases its orbit and speed and proportion to this distance to distance southward from the equator to the winter solstice, which the sun makes also 90 days. 90th concentury again in September to December again is 1,044 process of the same ratio, just as revolution of the sun is 24-hour path from east to east again gives an ultimate to day and nights, just so does the increase southward increase northward provide the change of seasons. This means that you're supposed to 64 2 hours 2 days and 8 hours over before renewing its spiral courses northward and southward, so that orbit for those extra 5 days 8 hours is concentric at the other 6,360 revolutions it is eccentric or spiral, giving the 2 solstice months to go in December 32.5 days each, the other 10 just 30 days.
Electromagnetic mass, which can increase the ordinary mechanical mass of the bodies, or in more modern terms, the increase should arise from their electromagnetic self-energy. An example of flat Earth electromagnetism in the Tesla shield, the outer ring is at the Antarctic Circle with the inner ring at the North Pole, creating a dipole connection to the electromagnetic dome. Core pole positive with surrounding negative energy get their energy. How tides work on a flat Earth model and increased electromagnetism when salt is added. Scalar waves can be warped into a dome around objects, such as cities or houses. Such a scalar wave force field is generally known as a Tesla shield, and it would be analogous to the shields referred to in the popular Star Trek series. Tesla shields have a definite defensive application and could not in any way be used for offensive purposes. The only defense from a blast of a scalar wave howitzer would be a Tesla shield. Electrical force is similar to gravity in that it is inverse proportional to the square of the distance between charges. By the 18th century, physicist Charles Coulomb defined the quantity of electricity, later known as a coulomb, and determined the force law between electric charges, known as Coulomb's law. Coulomb's law is similar to the law of gravity in that the electrical force is inversely proportional to the distance of the charges squared, and proportional to the product of the charges. By the end of the 18th century, we had determined that electric charge could be stored in a conducting body if it is insulated from its surroundings, being produced by the dynamo or capacitors that provided the input. A second way a Tesla coil produces a gain of energy is the increase in voltage as the longitudinal waves or ether flows across the secondary windings. As it flows across the secondary, voltage increases to extremely high levels. In this step, the gain of the system is further increased. This voltage increase is taking place without any magnetic induction or conventional transformer effect. The third way a Tesla coil produces a gain of energy is during the broadcast of longitudinal waves. As Tesla demonstrated, longitudinal waves have a self-sustaining or moment effect. That power. This produces an even larger gain of energy. Since the Earth generates its own electromagnetic current from the ice wall, scaffolding is not necessary with his generators. He has to initiate the current and use the scaffolding to fold it into the center. One might surmise that the heavy water firmament canoma exerts additional pressure or opposite resistance to.
Providing the necessary waveform shaping. This is considered to be the magnetic pulse aligning atoms in the metal. Eventually, all of the atoms are aligned, and so not further effect can be produced by further pulsing. This alignment can be destroyed if the metal bar is heated to a sufficiently high temperature, forcing the atoms into such an energetic state that the alignment is lost. It should perhaps be stressed here that the magnet itself does not have any power, in spite of seeming to have. Tom Bearden explains this clearly by pointing out that what happens is that the opposite poles of the magnet created a dipole, which unbalances the random quantum foam nature of the local environment, the zero-point energy field, and that causes continuous energy flows from the environment. The When a current flows through a straight wire B, a magnetic field is produced around it. The character of this field is shown in the figure over the case when the current is flowing upwards through a vertical wire. When the current is flowing downwards, the field is of exactly the same character, except that the lines of force run in the non-opposite direction round the wire. IRGRMV. Elasticity and magnetism. 19. Now by reversing the current as is stated above, we get a similar magnetic field with the lines of force going around in the opposite direction. W We may take diagram IV to represent the magnetic fields in the northern circle, with as the north center. But instead of reversing the current and so altering the direction of the circular lines of force, we may take a second field to represent the southern circle with the lines of force going round the PC and so from B to C in the opposite direction, as represented in diagram V. This will illustrate the currents flowing around the south pole. In the above diagram, a circular current is represented as going along the wire from A through N to B in one direction, and so on from B to C through S in another direction. The electric current thus going in an opposite direction through the wire, at S, from that at point N. The circular lines of forces, or magnetic currents, travel around S in an opposite direction to those which travel around point N. And thus we have an illustration of the two great currents which circle respectively around the north and south magnetic poles. These great currents meet in a middle and neutral line, or zone, called the equator, and interlock like the cogs of two connected wheels working together in harmony. This we will illustrate in diagram 6. In our next chapter. BYLADYBLOUNT and LBERTSMITH. 2, 0. Two poles and two vortices. CHPTERIV. TWOPOLES and DTWOVORTHES. We have seen, from the foregoing evidence, that there must be two poles. But while we as Zetetics admit this fact, we still deny that these poles are such as would be required by a globe lie at each end of its supposed polar axis. They are simply magnetic poles like the poles of an ordinary magnet, and not the poles of a rotatory sphere of any kind. It may be objected that the Earth's magnetic poles do not quite correspond with the celestial poles. True, but this may arise from the fact that the celestial and terrestrial fields of magnetic operation, though generally the same, are not quite coincident. But this difference may be easily accounted for. There are two celestial poles and two terrestrial poles, and the fact that these poles are like magnetic will account for their slightly different positions, as also for the fact that these poles gradually alter their geographical areas. But we cannot at present enter further into this interesting question. Nature seems to work in pairs. We have heaven and earth, the sun and moon, man and woman, positive and negative, north and south, electricity and magnetism, etc., etc. It is generally acknowledged by scientists that the Earth is a vast magnet. Being such, it will naturally have two magnetic poles, one in the northern circle or circuit, and another in the southern circle or circuit. In the centers of these vast circles of forces are the so-called poles, one positive in the north, the other negative in the south. The differences between the positive and the negative may in some measure account for the differences of climate in the two circles, the differences in the flora and fauna, and even, to some extent, for the differences found in the animal world generally, and the various races of mankind in particular. It is a noteworthy fact that God created and primarily placed the human race in the northern circle. The sun is a vast electric body, circling around and over. Two poles and two vortices. 21. The Earth and its motions may be known by experiment and observation. It is well known by those who study the laws of electricity and magnetism, that if an electric current be made to circle round any body, that body becomes magnetic by induction. Thus in the daily revolution of the sun around the Earth we have a physical cause which accounts for the magnetism of the Earth. If the sun were to leave the heavens, and cease revolving, the magnetic currents of the Earth would rapidly die out. Furthermore, if we were to seek for the physical cause of the daily revolution of the sun, we should find that it is bodily carried round by the ether, which is in rapid and continual circulation over the Earth. Thus the Creator has solved the problem of perpetual motion, or rather has given us an example of perpetual motion, the solution of which man has hitherto tried in vain to discover. If ever it be found out, by man, we may venture to predict that it will be found only in connection with some circulating electric body, or a circulating current of electricity inducing magnetic action. This circulation of the ether was advocated in the Earth for September, 1900. The ether was there said to be in a state of constant flux, like a great stream continually going around the north center, or so-called pole, carrying all the heavenly bodies with it at various heights, according to their varying densities. In fact, it was represented as a sort of vortex motion. VORTEXMOTIONDGRVITATION. When Sir Isaac Newton suggested, or invented, or formulated the idea of universal gravitation, eminent mathematicians and philosophers opposed the idea, and suggested certain theories of vortex motion, or motions, around a number of vortices to account for celestial phenomena. And this was done too with the idea of displacing the theory of gravitation. Our space will only allow us barely to mention such names as Kepler, Descartes, and Huygens. But these men, while on the right track, if we may so speak, were weighted and hampered by the incubus of the globular theory. Once VVE had proved by practical experiment, that the Earth is a plane and a vast magnet, then we are open to receive a 22. 2 poles and 2 vortices. Better idea of vortex motion and the untenable nature of the gravitation theory. But, coupled with the lately proved fact that the Sun, for at least 6 months of the year, circles around its southern pole, we are now compelled to admit that there are 2 ethereal vortices instead of 1 ethereal vortex as we formerly supposed. But the subject is too great to be encompassed within the limits of 1 or 2 articles. WE can at present only indicate the general outline of these forces or causes of celestial motion. We recommend Zetetics to study the kindred sciences of electricity and magnetism if they would arrive at a clear conception of the motions of the heavenly bodies. Speaking generally, we may state that the stars in the southern circle move in circles round the southern center, while those in the north move around the north center. The sun, moon, and planets move in spirals which are almost, but not quite, circles. Coining a word, we might say that those bodies which are called planets, or wanderers, sometimes spiral round the south center when they have south declination. TAR revolve much in the same way as the sun, the motion of which has already been explained. There are, however, some peculiarities or special characteristics in their orbits, especially in that of the moon, which will take 2 or 3 chapters to go into more fully, and so we must leave the moon's motions for future consideration. At present, proceeding with our explanation of the 2 vortices, we will further illustrate them by showing the action of 2 cogwheels when working together in harmony. This diagram, no. VL, showing 2 cogwheels interlocking or working together on their respective shafts or centers, may roughly illustrate the action of the 2 great currents or sets of currents, flowing round the north and south centers like 2 great vortices. The upper wheel may represent the circles or lines of forces revolving around the north center, as represented by the belt BC. This great belt will represent the magnetic force revolving around the Earth between the equator and the Tropic of Cancer, while the lesser belt GH may represent similar forces revolving around the Arctic Circle. The lower wheel illustrates similar lines or belts of force revolving around the southern center, the broader belt, DEF, showing the position of those forces between the equator and the Tropic of Capricorn, and the 2 poles and 2 vortices. 23. PL at GIRMVI. 2, 4. 2 poles and 2 vortices. Lesser belt JK those about the Antarctic Circle. T spokes of the wheels may represent meridians, which AC according to this time only already adduced must converge south of the equator as well as north. OF course, in the case of the 2 wheels, the cogs would be rigid, being made of solid wood, or metal. But the great magnetic currents are not rigid, but play into one another at the points of contact about the so-called equator. This has already been explained in a previous chapter on the sun's motion. Sun, being a comparatively small, light, electric body, is carried around by one set of currents in the south until, partly by its momentum and partly by magnetism, it is projected into the other set of currents in the north. Now if the northern currents go round in one direction, it is clear that the southern currents must go round in an opposite direction, so that the 2 currents may work together in harmony. And this agrees with the facts previously brought forward from the testimony of those in the south. If a spectator in the north looks towards his center, he will see those celestial orbs which have north declination, rise in the east on his right hand. But if a spectator in the southern circle looks towards his center, he sees the southern constellations and the sun rising in the east, but on his left hand. Thus the 2 vortices work together in harmony, as we have illustrated in the cogwheels. Respecting the ether, we may briefly state that our own conclusions are that all motion can be traced to the circulating movement of the ether, and that the ether is therefore substantial, or, in other words, a fine form of matter, something approaching the spiritual, if we may apply a material term to such a refined substance. And this agrees with the fact that God created light, or the luminiferous ether, before He made the sun. We have generally been taught that matter exists only in 3 forms: the solid, the liquid, and the gaseous. But there may be a 4th form of matter, as much finer than gaseous, as gaseous is finer than the liquid, and this form we believe to be the luminiferous ether. This ether, being a form of matter, has many, though perhaps not all, the attributes of ordinary matter, such as 2 poles and 2 vortices. 25. Elasticity, density, motion, and momentum. It thus carries around with it all the heavenly bodies at their various distances from the centers. According to the popular theory of gravitation, these bodies have to pass through the ether, or some such substance, which is said to fill all space. But this substance, however rare, would continually impede their progress, and would ultimately bring the universe to a standstill. And so the inventors of the gravitation theory had to invent a sort of frictionless ether to allow all their heavenly bodies to pass through it in constant periods of equal times. But a frictionless substance would be no substance at all, and the idea is contrary to all our experience and experiments. TE truth does not require such contradictions and absurdities. TE ether, which fills all space from the earth to the firmamental vault above, being enclosed in that vault, circulates, and, being substantive, it carries around with it all the heavenly bodies in their various orbits, which are more or less circular. TE's bodies have different times of revolution according to their varying heights, which heights are regulated by their varying natures, sizes, and densities. The sun and moon, which are by far the largest of these celestial orbs, are not more than about 30 miles, or about half a degree, in diameter. The highest of these floating orbs is probably not more than some 6,000 or 7,000 miles high. These have different times of revolution according to their varying heights, which heights are regulated by their varying natures, sizes, and densities. The sun and moon, which are by far the largest of these celestial orbs, are not more than about 30 miles, or about half a degree, in diameter. The highest of these floating orbs is probably not more than some 6,000 or 7,000 miles high. TE are all for the most part mere lights, or more literally light holders, that is centers of electric, or magnetic forces. These forces radiate from them and affect the atmosphere, and whatever comes in contact with that atmosphere, or whatever breathes it. But this opens up too vast a field to be treated of here. We trust we have given sufficient evidence to show that there is good cause why Zetetic's altogether discard, the modern theory of universal attraction, an unavailing pulling and tugging of all bodies to get together. Have shown that there is no need of such an absurd hypothesis in connection with the plain truth, but that known and practical forces such as electricity and magnetism are quite sufficient to account for all celestial further question of the motions of light, or the path of the sun's rays. Even our opponents must admit that there may be a difference between the path of a luminous and moving body, and the path of the rays of light which flow from that body. In this connection we shall have to consider the question whether rays of light move in straight lines or in great curves. Common opinion asserts that the former is the case, whereas it has been shown that the latter is the truth. This is mentioned to show that we are starting no new idea to account for southern phenomena. Electricity behaves in a similar manner both north and south of the equator. Recognizing that electricity and light are simply two forms of one force, we shall first proceed to say a few words about degrees, and then try to answer an objection which may be raised against what we have already advanced respecting the two vortices and the equatorial figure 8. The term degree, or degrees, is used in a variety of senses, but the primary meaning is that of a step or grade in progression, whether of rank, dignity, or distance, or the divisions of a circle whose circumference is divided into 360 parts. The latter is the meaning intended here. But we have to inquire what it is that so divides the circle, and what circle it is which is so divided, and, in the case of latitude, whether there be a circle or not. We see what are called degrees marked on a globe and we are led to conclude from astronomical works that degrees are necessarily connected with a spherical body. But there could be degrees on a plane surface, or the divisions of a circle lying in a horizontal plane, and the degrees lying along the radius or diameter of such a plane circle, which of course would be no. Degrees. 27. Part of a circle, so that, prima facie, degrees are no proof of the globular theory. We ought further to inquire what it is that makes these degrees. The astronomer makes lines on the globe the geographer puts them on the map and conforms his lines of longitude to the globular theory, and, rightly or wrongly, he makes the general outlines of his continents conform to these degrees. But what we have to ask is, what is it that constitutes a degree in nature, out of doors in the open, not in the study of the astronomer? In pursuing this inquiry we shall find that a degree is dependent upon, and is measured by the position of rays of light HT. That is, rays of sunshine,